Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Brewster here at TradeAthletics.com. Today we're going to be talking about 7 of my top Velo hacks to unlock velocity that we've used with our athletes. So these are things that we've implemented, and same day we've seen 1, 2, or even 3 mile an hour improvements in their velocity. Again, I'm going to get into why this isn't always a guarantee. So as an overview, this is not a clickbait title. These are actual tips that we've used and implemented with our guys that have had immediate impacts in their velocity. However, I generally hate quick fix claims like you'll see on the rest of YouTube, you'll see on the rest of social media, where coaches say, try this one drill and you'll instantly unlock 5, 6, 7 miles an hour in a day, a week, a month. It typically doesn't work that way. The reality is that transformations do take time, and that if you go on our website and look through all the dozens of testimonials, the guys who've gained 3, 5, 7, 10, 15 miles an hour, these happen over months and years, and that's where you really see these transformations take place, because a lot of these adaptations take time. However, instant jumps in velocity can happen in some instances. It's happened multiple times to me over the course of my career where, again, if you're watching this video, you're a pitcher, you've had something click at one point or another, and those little clicks represent significant increases in velocity. Something mechanically happens, suddenly you feel more connected, you feel more in sync, you feel more fluid. Something somebody says just clicks with you, and you get that immediate increase in velocity. So we're going to go over some of the things that we use with our athletes to try to uncover some of those instant velocity unlocks. Overall, mechanics are very poorly understood in the baseball world. This is just due to the complexity of pitching biomechanics and how everybody is unique, and they're dealing with a lot of different extraneous variables. So it really comes down to being a trial and error process. And that's what coaching is. Coaching is an educated trial and error process to try to speed up that rate of progress with the athletes. But at the end of the day, anybody who says they have a guaranteed quick fix for you is typically not being genuine. At best, we're giving an educated guess as to what we think the issue is and how we think we might be able to influence that mechanical pattern. So because of that, this is a trial and error process, and these are things to test and tweak within your own mechanics, assess them, see if they work, and then move forward from there. So just as a representation, this is a chart from my ebook, Building the 95 Mile an Hour Body, where we go through a lot of the philosophies and programming information that we use when we train our athletes, when we train our pitchers for increased velocity. And so this is just my specific case study in looking at my velocity from age 15 when I started training seriously to about age 22, my senior year of college, and just looking at my average velocity and also looking at my average body weight and lean body mass. And so what you can see is that over time, you're going to make most of your initial velocity gains early on in those first 1 to 2 years of training. And then it begins to level off a little bit. And so that's the general trend line of how velocity development tends to go as someone gets into training seriously for the first time. However, if we actually zoom in and we look at these types of transformations, it's not just this nice smooth curve. Usually what you'll find, and in my case this was certainly the case, is that a lot of these jumps have very specific 1, 2, 3 mile an hour jumps along that curve. And those specific jumps correspond a lot of times to something mechanically clicking. And so I can think of multiple times in my career where I figured out how to not muscle my lower half. I figured out how to get into the hinge better. I figured out how to relax my arm path better. And so as soon as those happened, something clicked on that specific day, and I got this 1, 2, 3 mile an hour consistent velocity bump. And so what we're trying to do here is encourage these things to click and encourage these velocity bumps. And so this is just a good example of how it's not necessarily a linear process, and how there is a point of diminishing returns over time where it does become progressively harder to get these velocity gains as you move further and further into your training. So the first potential variable that you can test that may represent a quick velo unlock for you is back foot position. And we've seen this happen fairly regularly with our athletes. And what I mean by back foot position is the angle of the back foot on the rubber. So you can have a slightly inwards angled back foot. You can have obviously a neutral back foot, which is most typical. You can have an outward facing back foot where that foot is facing back towards the second baseman for lefty, the shortstop for righty. You can also hook the rubber, which is another variant of the back foot. So this is something that a lot of pitchers don't necessarily ever think about, but when we actually get them in-house or we're training at these athletes remotely and we start to play around with it and velo test what's going on, usually there emerges a clear winner in terms of what elicits the best numbers, what feels the most comfortable for the athlete. And again, it's something they've never really thought about. And so oftentimes we can emphasize one foot position over another and take that forwards through the rest of their career. So it's very easy to split test. And what I mean by split testing is we like to use blind split testing as a way to gauge if a mechanical change is worth pursuing or not. So let's say it's the first day we've ever played with this with an athlete. We think there might be something to it. We're going to say, hey, get a radar gun, have your buddy man the radar gun, not tell you the numbers, and we're going to throw 10 throws with your back foot facing in, 10 throws with your back foot at neutral, 10 throws with your back foot facing outward, 10 throws hooking the rubber. It can be 70% intensity, 80% intensity. It doesn't have to be max effort, but the goal is not to know what the numbers are and to just try to keep the same level of effort throw to throw. And so you might do 10 each way, and then you might go back and just randomly mix it up. Go 2, 2, 2, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1. And again, your buddy is going to be keeping track of the numbers, and he's going to be able to tell you at the end, after you've done this, whether there is a clear winner or not. And so what you'll find is that about 1 in 5 guys will have a huge unlock from this. There will be one position that they significantly favor over another. A lot of times it'll kind of be a mixed bag where, you know, outward and neutral are kind of the same, or inward and neutral are kind of the same, and there isn't a huge difference. But about 1 in 5 guys will see that there is a significant 1, 2, or even 3 mile an hour differential in back foot position. So that's such an easy thing to split test that most guys haven't considered. Now what we'll find is that the outward angle tends to be associated with guys who have slightly more external rotation dominance. Their hips favor external rotation, and these are guys who tend to do better with kind of this vertical shin position and more of like a Carson Fulmer, a Justin Verlander angle. I've written about this in the past, about how different lower half mechanics will suit different hip structures better, but we'll typically see that the guys who do well with the outward angle on the rubber tend to be the guys that also do well with that vertical shin and have that specific hip structure. Right, I'm the opposite of that. I'm a guy with very IR dominant hips. I've got very good internal rotation in my back hip, very poor external rotation. And so I actually do very well with this inward angle. And when I first tested that, it was after initially learning the roll-in drill. And just testing that and then comparing it to the outward angle, for me it's about a 3 mile an hour difference. My hips do not want to function well when I turn my foot outward, and I can stay into my backside, I can stay into my hinge a lot better when I have my toe facing inward just about 10-15 degrees. And so you'll find that the inward angle works well for guys with IR dominance. Neutral can go either way. Again, not every athlete is particularly skewed in one direction with their mobility, and so neutral is obviously going to be the default for a lot of pitchers, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't test these other foot positions as well. And then hooking the rubber. Hooking the rubber is something that's a little bit controversial. It's kind of fallen in and out of favor over the years. Sandy Koufax was one of the big proponents of hooking the rubber, but I'm generally not a fan of hooking the rubber, because what tends to happen, and you actually see this in Sandy Koufax's delivery himself, is you see that the foot is preset into early eversion, and yes, the idea is that you can produce more lateral force and that you can get everything moving forward earlier, but what tends to happen is that the pelvis tips uphill and the torso tips uphill, and you end up just kind of falling to the plate. And so you see that in Sandy Koufax's delivery. I know he threw hard, I know he's a great pitcher, but he didn't necessarily have the optimal initial forward weight shift from a velocity standpoint. And so when it comes to hooking the rubber, it is something to test. And again, if it gives you the best velocity, the best numbers, the best comfort, command, if it gives you all these things, then by all means go with it. That's my point. At the end of the day, we're actually looking at the outcome and which position gives you the best outcome. So test all of these, blind test, get a buddy to man the radar gun, and just see if there's a clear winner. That is the first Velo hack, is just experimenting with back foot position. The next potential Velo hack is experimenting with your position on the rubber and or your stride direction. Now, position on the rubber simply refers to where do you start on the rubber. Are you starting far arm side, are you starting middle of the rubber, or are you starting far glove side? Now, there's a few interpretations of why different pitchers should start on different sides of the rubber. Obviously, deception can become one of them, command can become another, but from a velocity standpoint, a lot of times you'll find that there is a clear winner when you just simply split test different starting positions. And so it really has to do with influencing stride direction, is largely based on where you start on the rubber relative to your target. So if my target's right in front of me and I'm starting all the way over here, that's going to influence my stride direction versus if I start middle or if I start far glove side. And so starting on target or starting slightly closed is obviously most typical. ASMI's data with elite professionals found that they stride about 4 to up to 14 inches closed in their stride on average. So you don't typically see guys that stride open. You're going to typically see guys striding on target or very slightly closed. And so the position on the rubber has a strong influence on this stride direction. It also has an influence on the timing of the linear move, torso rotation, throwing arm. And so there's a lot of dominoes that are put into place and that fall into place based upon that initial position on the rubber, the initial first move, right? Everything that happens at the start of the throw really dictates a lot of what happens towards the end of the throw. And so we can influence a lot just by playing with that simple variable. Again, it's very simple to split test. Just grab a buddy and throw 10 each way. You can mix up the order, try to keep the same intensity, and just see if there's a clear winner. And we have seen immediate 1 to 2 mile an hour bumps where we take a guy who's always throwing from his glove side, maybe he strides a little bit open, and we have him start from his arm side. And he gets a little bit more on time, his arm's up, and he gets a velocity bump. And it feels a lot more comfortable for him. Obviously, there are times when it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, no harm, no foul, keep doing what you're doing. But again, this is something that a lot of people haven't really considered that can represent a pretty easy and significant velocity unlock. The next potential velocity hack is just looking at your fastball grip. Again, this is something that seems super obvious, but a lot of pitchers either haven't changed their grip in about 10 years, or they really haven't taken that time to examine it a little bit more closely and see if there's something they could be doing differently. Everyone just kind of assumes that high school, college, and pro pitchers know how to throw a fastball, and it must just automatically be optimal because everyone knows how to throw a fastball. That's not really the case, as we've seen. A lot of guys that throw either only a 4-seam or only a 2-seam, they decided at some point early on in their career that the other one didn't work for them. I know I'm guilty of this. I realized that I could throw a 2-seam just as hard as a 4-seam, maybe like 15 years ago. And so I haven't even really tried throwing a 4-seam in a long time. And a lot of guys are in that same boat. A lot of guys also haven't played with the actual width of their fingers. They kind of just do what's comfortable. But we've seen athletes who they're gripping their 4-seam and their fingers are like 3 inches apart. And all you have to do is move their fingers closer together, split test that, and they get a 1 to 2 mile an hour bump from that. Thumb position is another one. Some guys have their thumb on the complete side of the ball. Some guys have their thumb totally tucked. Some guys have their thumb just on the opposite side under their fingers. So thumb position can have a significant effect on velocity as well, and on spin efficiency, and on what the fastball actually does as far as its movement profile. So simply playing with these variables can give 1 to 3 mile an hour bumps. Adjusting for a 4-seam and 2-seam, playing with finger width, and then playing with thumb position, side of the ball, under the ball, tucked. Again, it's that simple. You can do this over the course of one day and just see if it's something worth pursuing. Again, if it doesn't work, no harm, no foul. But we've seen these kind of crazy instances where it does unlock some sort of second, third, fourth pitch, or unlock a 1 to 2 to 3 mile an hour velocity bump over what they're doing. Again, without much work, without having to get stronger, without having to get more powerful, and without having to make any other mechanical adjustments. And it's also important while you're at it, while you're split testing these different fastball grips, if you have access to a Rapsoda or, in best case scenario, a TrackMan like we do in-house at Shred HQ, being able to see the effect of these different finger positions, thumb positions, and grips on the actual movement profile of the pitch. So what happens when I change the finger width to the vertical break on the fastball, the horizontal break, or the spin rate? What happens? One of our coaches, Declan Cronin, he's a pitcher with the White Sox. He was mostly sitting 92, 93 in bullpens, throwing 4-seam fastballs. And we said, hey, why don't we play around with a little bit of a 2-seam grip? And his first one was like 94.5. He's sitting 94, 95 with the 2-seam, and he's getting some outrageous seam shifted wake, just throwing these like demon cutters with a 2-seam. Right, that's a pitch that just came out of nowhere because we took the time to actually just experiment, right? It is really a trial and error process. And if you look at pitchers at the top level who have these crazy, nasty pitches, a lot of times they happen by accident or they happen just by tinkering, right? You look at like a Zach Britton sinker or Mariano Rivera cutter, like a lot of these best pitches aren't always designed in a lab. They just happen, and they are discovered through this trial and error process. And so having the ability to track velocity with this intelligent tinkering, and having the ability to track the movement profile and the effect of these slight tinkers on how the ball actually moves, again, extremely valuable, can happen over one day, and can be a very instant velo hack. The fourth potential velo hack is intent or post-activation potentiation. And these are kind of linked because it has to do with the active intensity and active muscular effort that you're bringing into the throw from your central nervous system.
Great fastball hitter. Scherzer brings home
And so I'll get into what post-activation potentiation is in a second. But basically what intent is, it's a popular buzzword. Most of you have heard this word thrown around, originally discussed by Paul Nyman. But the idea of intent, which is kind of a vague term in and of itself, but in this specific context, it means increased effort. Increased effort to throw the ball as hard as you can. Now, it's kind of controversial in the pitching world, just because a lot of the hardest throwers, a lot of the most efficient throwers actually indicate that they're not trying to throw as hard as they can. Jacob deGrom is a good example. He actually has increased his velocity over his career almost every single year, and what he says is that he's trying to throw less hard, he feels smoother, and he's actively not trying to bring this intensity into the throw. But then we'll see the opposite. We'll also see examples of guys like Charlie Morton where they hit a 2 to 3 mile an hour velo spike in 2017, and they're asked what they did, and they said, well, I'm just trying to throw the ball harder instead of cruise. And so you'll see that for different guys, different things work. And so intent can be something that can be a velo unlock, especially if it's a guy that has trouble tapping into his body and maybe a training setting. He just can't turn it on. He doesn't have that aggression when he throws. Intent can be something that represents a major unlock for those guys. So the truth is somewhere in the middle as far as what works best for what guy. Some guys you'll find that cueing intent actually causes them to muscle up. It ruins their sequencing, and it actually leads to a velo decrease. Athletes who already have great sequencing, they're already loose, they already have good mechanics. Cueing the intensity, the adrenaline, you'll typically see a velocity increase in some of those guys. So again, it can represent a quick velocity unlock, just helping an athlete learn how to tap into it a little bit better. So properly timed effort or intent adds well-timed power without ruining sequencing. However, the double-edged sword is that improperly timed intent can lead to muscling up, and this is where you'll see athletes that when they try to throw as hard as possible, their arm actually moves slower. So some of our athletes will show an immediate 2 to 3 mile an hour spike on any given day when trying to throw hard versus just cruising. Again, we mentioned the Charlie Morton case, but again, some will show the opposite. Others have a hard time turning it on in a training setting, but they can turn it on in a game. And these athletes a lot of times will respond to what's called post-activation potentiation, which is basically a routine that helps to prime the nervous system, doing a series of either max effort isometrics or max effort plyometrics, med ball throws, jumps, high effort rotational chops on something like a Kaiser machine like we've got here. Basically just turns on the CNS, activates the muscles, and puts the body in more of a primed state to be able to elicit that power and be able to elicit that velocity. And so a lot of times for athletes that do have a hard time turning it on and do respond to this intent and adrenaline in a game situation, we can often elicit a 2 to 3 mile an hour spike in a training environment just by influencing what they're doing with a potentiation routine. So again, it's important to know your pitcher. Intent is not a cure-all, but sequencing really is the most important thing. Intent can have a positive or negative effect on their sequencing, but again, that can represent a very quick velocity hack for the right guy. The fifth velocity hack that you can implement is simply playing with tempo, so increasing or decreasing your tempo. Now, tempo refers to the speed at which a pitcher moves down the mound from the start of his delivery to ball release. So you'll typically think of tempo as like maybe a 1-3 or being a 1-4, 1-5 to the plate. That generally represents tempo, but what we like to do is actually standardize tempo across the windup, the stretch, the slide step, and pitcher to pitcher using how Paul Nyman likes to categorize tempo, which is from peak leg lift to ball release. So from peak leg lift to ball release, we kind of take out that initial rocker step in the windup. We take out maybe they're a little bit slower out of the windup with how they initially start their delivery, but we can standardize it, taking it from peak leg lift to actual ball release, and that's how we look at tempo. I've written articles on this in the past. I'll make sure to link that in the description if you want to learn more about how we actually calculate and classify tempo. But basically, tempo has a big influence on the timing, rhythm, and sequencing of the rest of the throw. How fast we initiate that motion down the mound will have a big influence on the actual positions we get into and how much arm speed and force we're able to produce. Too slow leaves excess time for energy to bleed and for inefficient patterns to creep in. So you don't want to be, two seconds to the plate, take forever to get down the mound, and you also don't want to be too fast. And a lot of people don't realize that there is such a thing as too fast of a tempo, but there is. And so too fast of a tempo leads to insufficient time for the lower half to actually build and get into good positions, right? If you typically think of someone who slide steps and they don't take any time to actually load into their backside, yeah, they might be a 0.8 to the plate. They might be very quick from a tempo standpoint, something like 17 frames. But typically if you slow that guy down and you actually get him to load into his backside, they're gonna get a velocity spike as well. And so for the guys who fall in this camp of being a little bit too slow, which would be anything over about 25 to 27 frames on video from peak leg lift to ball release, cueing up tempo and just cueing them to be athletic and get down the mound will oftentimes yield a velocity bump more times than not. And then vice versa, when we see a pitcher who's way too fast down the mound, he doesn't take any time to actually load into his backside, and he falls on the very, very, very quick end of this spectrum that we see in the hardest throwers. A lot of times cueing down tempo, cueing them to let the throw be able to stay in the backside, that will represent a velocity spike for these guys. So it really depends on which camp you fall into. I recommend you check out the Tempo article in the description to learn a little bit more. The sixth potential velocity hack is the old school windup, or just incorporating the windup in general. Now what we've seen is that the windup encourages this athletic forward weight shift. And what we've seen in the past decade or so is pitchers a lot of them have gotten away from the windup in kind of the name of simplifying things. Oh, the windup has too many moving parts, or you want to simplify and only work out of the stretch because that's when the most important pitches of the game are occurring. And obviously that's true, but trying to minimize the number of moving parts, it sounds good on the surface, but if it's happening at the expense of ruining a pitcher's smoothness and athleticism and turning him into a robot, then it's a problem. So we'd rather have smooth, flowing, well-sequenced, athletic, positions encouraged from the windup than someone who just has a choppy, robotic stretch delivery. Ideally, we can have smooth, athletic delivery through both. But my thought and our thought at Tread is that it's actually important to keep training, even if you're only going to use it in a training setting as kind of drill work or pre-throwing in kind of your pre-throwing catch play. So even if you're only going to throw out of the stretch in game and you make that decision, still keeping some wind-up work in your training can help encourage that athleticism and smoothness, and then you can hopefully bring that back into your stretch delivery when you actually go into the game. Now, along with the wind-up, again, to encourage that weight shift and athleticism, experimenting with this hands over the head cue and the old school windup where you actually let the hands flow with the leg lift, that can be a common fix for any sort of sequencing or timing issues between the upper half and the lower half. So if we find that the upper half is not sequenced well with the lower half, a lot of times, again, even if it's just in a training setting, if we have them go through their windups or their walking windups with the hands over the head cue, that in and of itself, we've seen it over and over and over again, where a certain percentage of guys will have a quick 1, 2, or even 3 mile an hour bump just from playing with that cue. And so we look at this hands over the head cue as kind of being a bridge between what the upper half is doing and what the lower half is doing. It gives the upper half and it gives the arm action something to be doing while the leg is lifting versus just kind of hanging out robotically or stiffly or statically while the leg lifts. It gives it something to be doing, and it really can act as this bridge to connect the entire delivery together. So again, simplifying the delivery is good on the surface, but again, it can be a mistake if it eliminates the athleticism and the smoothness of what's going on. And so even if we encourage that athleticism, that weight shift, that full wind up, the hands over the head in a training setting, a lot of times you'll find that the athlete will at least be able to maintain that if you're working on it at some point throughout the week, throughout the month, throughout the year, and be able to take that to their stretch delivery a little bit more regularly. The seventh velocity hack is to simply adjust total workloads. Now, we've seen this time and time again where fatigue masks fitness. And what this means is that if you're in a chronically under-recovered state, where your body's fatigued, you're dragged down, you're doing too much from a throwing standpoint or from a lifting standpoint, you're not going to be able to display your true fitness or your true performance capabilities. Now, this is true in a training standpoint if you're trying to demonstrate your best 1 rep max squat and your legs were always fatigued, you're not going to be able to demonstrate your best 1 rep max squat because you're in a fatigue state and your nervous system is just not as primed and not as fresh as it needs to be. So if we're constantly performing in this suboptimal state, you're not going to be able to actually demonstrate what your body's potentially capable of. Now, the top offenders, it's generally not going out and throwing 150 pitches in a game. Coaches at this point are aware enough of pitch counts to not completely overdo it in a game setting. But what typically happens, it's the recovery or the moderate effort days in between those starts, in between those outings, or before the game, where this excess volume and this excess intensity starts to build up and become a problem. And so when guys are taking their recovery, maybe they throw 100 pitches in their start, and then a day later it's their recovery day, they should just be taking their arm for a walk, tossing out to 60, 90 feet, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is, and they're taking that day as like an 80% day or 70% day. And then they have a moderate effort day that they, it should be somewhere in between, and they're taking that as a high effort day. And so the big offender typically is the in-between days when you're not really thinking about it too much and just doing a little bit too much every day when you should be giving your body a chance to recover. Pre-game throwing and bullpen throws are often unaccounted for as well. So again, this is the reliever in season where Pre-game, maybe he's doing max effort long toss 5 days a week, and then he's doing like 10 pull downs a day, and then pre-game, before he gets in the game and he's in the bullpen, he's throwing 40, 50, 60 throws in the bullpen before he even gets in the game, right? These are areas where people often kind of forget that this volume and this workload is still accumulating, and so monitoring and auditing those as well. And then in-season lifting volumes are another common offender, why velocity might be down in season. Again, a lot of coaches like doing 3x10s, 4x10s, 4x8s in season for squats, deadlifts, name any lift you want. We typically don't like to do this because this causes a little bit more fatigue than we would like in season. And so from our standpoint, we like doing things that are a little bit lower volume and a little bit more power oriented in season. They don't make you fatigued, they don't make you sore, and you can still work on this power output and still maintain strength with, hey, maybe 1 or 2 heavy sets and a couple power sets. Get in, get out. You're not sore, you maintain your strength throughout the course of the season. And so just accounting for what you're actually doing in the weight room can be very helpful as well, as far as what is my overall workload like and how do these things all interact. So if you have identified that you have an issue somewhere and you might be doing a little bit too much, especially in season, I'd recommend taking a small deload. Again, you can't deload from your in-game throws necessarily in season, but what you can do is drop the volume a little bit of what you're doing in the weight room, reel it back in a little bit on your recovery days, your moderate days, and really audit how many throws do you need in your bullpen before you actually get in the game to be ready to get in the game. Again, we've seen quick 2 to 3 mile an hour velo spikes just from getting a guy in a more recovered state and getting away from this chronically fatigued, overworked state. So just to tie this video all up, at the end of the day, most progress can't actually be hacked, right? These hacks are fun, these instant fixes are fun for this type of content, but these types of transformations on like a one-day scale are kind of few and far between. So I wanted to share these with you because they can work and you should try them, but at the end of the day, they're not the norm, and the way that most of the best players actually get to the top and demonstrate these transformations that you see on our website is it's a multi-year process. And so that's really what I want to hammer home. That's what we cover in a lot of the other videos where, again, training gets a lot more complex and it's not just getting instant velo hacks, as fun as that is. So what it really comes down to is understanding your limiting factors, understanding from a bird's eye view what's holding you back from a nutrition standpoint, mobility standpoint, body composition standpoint, mechanical standpoint especially, movement efficiency, mobility standpoint. All these things come together as in your profile as an athlete. And again, the idea is basically, can we take each of these individual areas and maximize it and add the sum of all those things together? That's when we can really begin to squeeze out performance on these more impressive levels. So once you understand your limiting factors, from there it comes down to developing a well-rounded plan that actually addresses these limiting factors specific to you. You shouldn't be doing the same exact mobility movements as your teammate who has completely different issues. You shouldn't be working on the exact same throwing drills with the same cues and focus as a teammate who has a completely different set of mechanical issues. And so understanding what your factors are helps you actually identify a program that's going to work to fix those limiting factors. From there, it simply comes down to getting to work and having someone in your corner that you can talk to, that you can rely on to adjust the program and adjust what you're doing when things aren't going your way. And it's never going to be a linear process. It's never going to be just gaining a mile an hour a week or gaining a mile an hour a month or gaining 5 miles an hour a year. It's not going to work like that over the long term. And so what you need is someone in your corner when you plateau, which you will plateau, to problem solve what's going on, problem solve what's happening with these limiting factors, and see what needs to be adjusted over time to get to your goals. Guys, thanks for watching this video. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and subscribe to this channel. We put out 1 to 2 new videos a week, diving into all these different topics related to pitch and development. And again, if you haven't liked the video, go ahead and like the video. It helps out the channel tremendously. If you have questions related to your specific career and your specific issues, don't hesitate to shoot us an email to contact@tradeathletics.com. We read every single one. I'll see you guys in the next video.